if a psychological state becomes profound enough, it starts to become a social state. And so I would say that kingdom of God that's within, which is something Tolstoy wrote a lot about, by the way, that was a book he wrote a book called The Kingdom of God is Within Us, and that profoundly influenced Mahatma Gandhi, by the way, and they had a lengthy correspondence, which was part of the reason that Gandhi became used nonviolent resistance, right, in his fight against the English, which is quite interesting. But I think that there's look, it's something like this. Maybe when you go to a concert, it's a great concert, and you're having a very profound psychological experience of unity and harmony, which of course is what you get at a concert. But if the experience is profound enough psychologically and individually, it also starts to encompass and envelop the people around you. And so I think the kingdom of God that Christ was talking about was something like, this is why I like Jean Piaget so much, it's something like the Piagetian equilibrated state, where things are working out really well for you and you're deeply immersed in a meaningful experience. But at the same time, that meaning is structured so that it's maximally beneficial for the people who are immediately around you and for the people who are distally related to you. And so everything stacks up. And that's something like the idea of the ladder to heaven or the stairway to heaven, that everything's stacking up properly. And then I think when people experience that, and this is where the metaphysics touches the material, I think that when people, yes, exactly that, precisely that, yes, precisely that.
Common theme in Christianity.
Well, then you notice that the demons are upside down going down.
Right.
Right, which is exactly right. That's exactly the right way to conceptualize it. So I think that when people have an experience of that stacking of meaning, that they also have an intimation of immortality that goes along with that, that's embodied. And that's partly why the metaphysical speculations about the reality of the kingdom of heaven have emerged. Because it's not just conceptual, right? There is embodied experience. And people report the same thing when they have transcendental experiences of various sorts. And we know from a scientific perspective that those can be very reliably induced with the use of agents like psilocybin. And, I've been really fascinated by what's been happening at Johns Hopkins Hospital with the psilocybin experimenters, because one of the most recent things they showed was that if you take people dying of cancer and you give them psilocybin and they have a mystical experience, which is something like an experience of the kingdom of God on earth, but also eternally at the same time, that they lose their fear of death, or that at least it's much modified. And, that's a hell of a finding. That's really, you can't just walk away from that easily, because that's a hell of a thing to treat.
Well, yeah, I have a chapter on that in Heavens on Earth on near-death experiences. But we're talking about two different things. The transitioning from life to death in the most pain-free or anxiety-reduced state is progress. Medical progress, psychological progress, or whatever. And I'm all for, if psilocybin does it or whatever, then great, we should do that. But there's a lot of people that claim more than that this is opening the doors of perception into another world,
right,
that is actually out there, and that those of us have not taken acid, we just simply can't know. So now we get at this question of truth. One of my columns in Scientific American, I recently wrote, called "What is Truth Anyway?" I mean, when I say, like, I prefer dark chocolate and you prefer milk chocolate, there's no truth that is to be discovered. Yours is true for you, mine's true for me. Or I say Stairway to Heaven is the greatest rock song of all time, and you say, no, Freebird is better than Stairway to Heaven, and we argue about that. But there's no experiment we're going to run. And so as we start to move along these lines, like when Deepak Chopra tells me meditation works, okay, so if it works for you or it doesn't work for me, okay, those are still in that state of internal truths. But what we want to know in science is, does it work for everybody? Or, 67% of people that do an hour of meditation a day under these conditions have reduced stress hormones and blood pressure and so on in some measurable way. That's different than just an internal state. So when we're talking about, again, just working on toward striving to better ourselves or some kind of heaven, if you mean just metaphorically so that I can better myself, that's different than there's an actual place you can go to that's going to be there after we die. And so I think this is where scientists go, wait a minute.
You also start messing about with the idea of place. in a way that's the problem with having discussions about fundamental realities. And when you said, another thing that Christ said was that the kingdom of heaven is spread upon earth, but men do not see it. Right. So, and that's something that's akin to the idea of the kingdom of God is within you. Although it's a strange twist on it, because it also adds an element of externality or physicality to it, and an element of immediacy, not something that's forestalled into the future. But I wonder, see, in my wilder moments of speculation, I have this notion that if things stack up properly, so imagine that you're immersed in a very deeply meaningful experience, and it's operating, it's indicating that harmony has been established between multiple levels of being simultaneously. I wonder if that can put you in a place that's profound enough or deep enough so that the structure of time and space itself starts to warp around that. I mean, I know that's I can't formulate it well, but there's something about it that seems to me to be correct about that, because people have intimations of immortality, and they have intimations of heavenly and hellish abodes as well, and they're not the simple kind of rational fundamentalist beliefs that often people talk about when they're discussing religious belief. They're more reflected in direct experience, and it's not easy to make sense of them.
Well, when you delve into the literature on Judaism, Christianity, and Islam and their versions of the afterlife and heaven, they're quite different. And the Jews are far less obsessed with going someplace after death. In fact, originally they were going no place at all. Sheol was just nothing. It was just you returned to where you were before you were alive, just no place. So that religion is far more focused on the here and now. Like we have a moral duty to help people, the poor and so on now, and to live better lives and more lives of dignity and honor and morality now. And Christianity really started off more like that, then kind of morphed over the centuries, and particularly in fundamentalists and evangelicals in the 20th century, toward this place we're going to go.
Right, after we die.
Yeah, you kind of have the schism in Christianity today between the kind of the fundamentalists that are constantly talking about the afterlife and accepting Jesus, and they're focused on missionary work and converting people, versus, say, maybe the Rick Warrens of the world that want to put their money into soup kitchens and helping the poor, and Christians have a moral duty to help those in need, and not so much focused on the next life. And it's funny, because there are real dangers associated with both those kinds of conceptualizations. I mean, you alluded to one danger that was associated with, let's call those who are concerned more with the immediate present, and that's starting to manifest itself in these technological immortalists. They're saying, well, we should transform the nature of being extraordinarily radically right here and now so that we have heaven and immortality here. You think, well, what do we lose by doing that? And that's a question that's really worth asking, because if we're transhuman, then we lose being human. And it may be that we actually don't want to lose being human, even though being human means suffering and malevolence, something like that. It's a very hard question. But then the Christians, this is where Nietzsche went after the Christians with such an axe. He said, well, if you despise the current world and you leave everything to be rectified in the afterlife, then you just abandon life itself, and you're really traitors to life. Right. And so how to steer through those two shoals, let's say, or two cliffs, that's a very difficult proposition.
Just recently, Saudi Arabia ended its 50-year petrodollar deal with the U.S., which has the potential to weaken the U.S. dollar. Since 1974, Saudi Arabia has sold oil solely in US dollars, which was huge for our global economic dominance. Now, they want other options. If there's less demand for the US dollar, what happens to its value? It's reasons like this that make it important to diversify some of your savings into gold, and you can do that with help from Birch Gold. Right now, qualifying purchases by July 31st are eligible to get a one-of-a-kind, limited edition Golden Truth Bomb. The only way to claim your eligibility, though, is by texting Jordan to 989898. For over 20 years, Birch Gold Group has helped tens of thousands of Americans to protect their savings by converting an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. Protect your savings by diversifying away from the US dollar with gold. Text Jordan to 989898 and Birch Gold will help you convert an old IRA or 401k into an IRA in gold for no money out of pocket. Right now, qualifying purchases by July 31st are eligible to get a one-of-a-kind, limited edition Golden Truth Bomb. Text Jordan to 989898. That's Jordan to 989898 today.
Well, this is the message. My message in the book to the singularitarians and the cryonics and transhumanists and so on is, I'm glad you're working on this problem, but because they say, Shermer, don't you want to live to be 1,000 years? And my response is, look, just get me to 90 without, cancer, and 100 without Alzheimer's, and 110 without being plugged into machines and lying in a bed, because that's not a life. And so I'm glad people are working on, like, what's the best diet, how much sleep should you get, what can we do to improve our memory, and so on. That's all great, and I'm glad
more power to them.
And I'm glad Kurzweil is now the chief engineer of all Google. I mean, he's got some resources to do something about this. But this focus on living 1,000 years, first of all, you may miss the little incremental things we can do, but also you're missing out now. There's this film I write about in the book on Ray Kurzweil. It's a little kind of biographical film of him called Transcendent Man, and he's constantly talking about living forever and so on. And he's obsessed with his father. His father died when he was 51. The father was 51, and Ray was, kind of missed out having a father figure because the father was always working, and Ray was, a real entrepreneur achiever from his teenage years, so he was always working. And the film kind of follows him around, collecting everything he can about his father, and he keeps it in the basement of his house, and he wants to resurrect his father in a computer. And it's like, oh boy, Freud would have a field day with this. I'm not a Freudian guy, but there's something going on there. This sort of morose focus on.
I see this strange dichotomy and attitude that you just described, even characterizing you. I see that in my own life because I'm very interested in technologies that stave off aging, dietary manipulations, and I have this machine in my basement that's an intense pulse light machine that's unbelievable skin rejuvenator. Like it's an absolute miracle, this machine. And it'll take sun damage from your skin completely and force rejuvenation. It's like using Photoshop on your skin. It's amazing. And so I think, well, isn't it interesting to do everything possible to prolong youth and life? But at the same time, there's another part of me that's thinking, well, this is something I wrote about in this new book that I'm publishing. I was thinking about Socrates and his ability to accept his death. And what Socrates seems to have revealed in his acceptance of his death was that if you live your life properly, then you've lived your life in some sense. You've exhausted it in some sense. And the question is, if you lived 1,000 years, well, what exactly would you do? Like I've had kids and I loved having kids, but I wouldn't have them again. Like I wouldn't do that again, I don't think. And I have a grandchild and that's fine, but that's a new thing. And like I've had a career, and I as I get older, the idea of having 10 more careers seems, it's not like I'm not interested in it, but it doesn't grip me the same way that it would have, say, 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so I wonder if it is the case that life is in some sense structured so that its finitude is necessary and not something that should be, well, casually transcended, let's say.
Well, the transhumanists would respond to that, you're just used to this idea of only living 80, 90 years and then you're done, that we would adjust to that. Well, maybe. The other problem...
Well, yeah, the question would be, though, who would be the we that would adjust to that? Because...
Well, yes, you would no longer be, okay, to get there, we would really no longer be human. The idea of the transhumanists and the singularitarian people is truly, you're not human anymore. We have brain, like the cochlear implant for hearing is a kind of brain transplant device. Well, they want to ramp that up, and put chips in your cortex, and you'd essentially have Wikipedia in your brain for instant access and so on. And so it would truly bring new meaning to what it means to be human. Okay.
Right. Yes. Well, and that's, you could also argue that that's a form of death, because if you transform yourself so radically that you're unrecognizable, then where's the continuity with what you once were?